peaceful and beautiful and physical and angry all at the same time.
Were you idiot, your mind would cave in and your heart would explode within your chest.
This is going to be a shame.
Here we go!
So, here we go again. Brand new edition. Talkie and Audio. Matt Robinson with you as always. We'll explain why in a moment, but yeah, just me again, which, as you know, wasn't the plan. Been a busy day or two around the sports landscape. We'll talk some Leafs later on. We'll save that to the end for those of you who've had enough. We'll talk some Sens here in a minute. We'll talk some Ottawa Charge here in a minute. Keep things a little more local here in the nation's capital. Yeah, we were expecting to have Kevin Mickey on the show here from Sportsnet just before he takes off for Italy to work the Olympic Games. And that sort of fell through. Got a text from Mickey on Tuesday. We were going to speak late Tuesday night, and he asked if we could push to Wednesday, which was no problem. So we were going to do that, and then heard from him kind of mid-afternoon Wednesday that wasn't going to be a go either. And I'm not going to get into all the reasons here. Frankly, I didn't grill him on those reasons, but he is leaving in less than 36 hours for Europe. So, and with a young kid at home and, a family, and it could have been just about anything, right? When you're asking people to give up their time and come and do this, I've often used the phrase that I don't have subpoena power. So anybody who comes on here does it voluntarily, obviously. As we crack open a Life in the Clouds from Collective Arts, an old favorite, so no need to dive too deep. You've all seen it, you've all had it, you've all tried it. And so it leaves you in kind of a position, and, you be real about it. It's frustrating as the host, but you don't hold any ill will towards your guests. Like I said, I didn't ask Mickey what the problem was. It's none of my business. He's come through for us a pile of times before. He's already offered to dial in when he gets there from, maybe one of the venues or certainly the host city, get kind of a vibe check. So there's no frustration with Mickey, but there is a frustration with, life on the indies, as they say. That can leave you hanging a little bit. And look, I don't mind doing these solo shows now and then, but I don't like doing them back to back, right? And we did do one earlier in the week. I understand the shows with the guest where it's more of a conversation are better suited. And frankly, that's what I prefer to give you. Frankly, that's what I prefer to record. But things happen, things come up, and you just sort of roll with it. So, yeah, it was frustrating, but there was more than enough, as I said, on the agenda for me to bite into here tonight and get something out for Thursday. So that's why Mickey is not here. Like I said, could have been any number of things for that guy as he gets ready to leave for Europe for more than 2 weeks. I can only imagine. So we will look to connect with him from Italy when he gets over there. We did not try and set a time or anything like that. We'll let him get settled and see how things shake loose. As I said here, it was a busy night of hockey here in the nation's capital with both the Sens and the Charge at home. And I'll be honest with you, I think you guys know I am a Charge fan. I am not exactly a Sens fan. I think it would be safe to say. But this is the market I live in and cover a lot. And I got to tell you, I kind of hate it. Maybe that's overstating it. I kind of cringe when I see that both of the teams are at home on the same night. Certainly, I understand they're going to play on the same night reasonably often. I don't love it when they're both home on the same night. I guess to a certain degree, they're different crowds, but not completely. And this is not that big of a market. Now, I have not yet seen what the attendance numbers were like for either team at the time I'm sitting down to record this. Certainly, neither of them looked disastrous. But you would just think with how infrequently the Charge are playing, it sort of feels like once a week almost. They've been oddly spaced out here. Now, I do know a few weeks ago around the holidays, I guess it would have been, they seem to be playing a lot more often, so maybe they just got out ahead of everybody in terms of games played. I'm not certain. But they sort of seem to have been in a bit of a holding pattern here for the last week or two. And so to see their game land here on Wednesday night at the same time the Sens were home felt like sort of an unnecessary evil. And yet, all 8 teams played on Wednesday night. This was the last night in the PWHL season before the Olympic break. So I guess the idea was to get everyone to play and finish up as close to that break as possible. Give each of the athletes going the exact same number of days to get over there. I'm sure each country has a slightly different protocol on when they plan to roll into Milan. But does it really matter? Like, would it have been the end of the world if Ottawa had their home game on Tuesday? And look, I'm not trying to place blame on anybody. Like I said, it makes me cringe. It doesn't make me pissed. I just don't really like to see it because I don't think it's necessary. I don't think it serves hockey fans in this market all that well. And like I said, it's not a huge market to begin with. But I don't think anybody set out to screw this up. I guess if you wanted to pass blame, you would have to put it on the PWHL. The Sens schedule and the NHL in general goes out early in the summer. And the PWHL, we often end up giving them shit for like, hey, the season starts in 3 weeks. Can we get a schedule? Like, it always seems kind of last minute. And in that case, you would think you could take a look and go, well, it's not really the end of the world if Ottawa plays their last home game before the Olympic break on Tuesday instead of Wednesday. I don't think that would have been a huge problem. But I'm sure there are other complicating factors. Maybe they just like the idea of having this be the first ever night where all 8 teams played at the same time, which it is. One evening where all your teams are on the ice at the same time, and then, you get everybody sent off to the Olympics. It's kind of this big send-off moment. Maybe that was the whole thing, but I don't think it's ideal here in this market. Not the end of the world, just not the way I prefer to see it laid out. All that being said, they both did play in town on Wednesday. Both won, actually. The Charge win, a little more dramatic or out of nowhere, I suppose, than the Sens. We'll get to that in a second. Let's start with the Senators. Look, it's funny to... Maybe funny is the wrong word. I don't know how many Sens fans are in a laughing mood right now. But we just watched them knock off Vegas and Colorado in pretty convincing fashion. And when I said it's frustrating, maybe it's more ironic. Like, the Sens are a good team, and we've talked about it before. They have been buried by a bad penalty kill, bad goaltending, and some serious injuries in the first half of the season. And so, look, I don't know if I matched up Ottawa fully healthy, full lineups, all of that, against either one of those teams in the playoffs if I would pick Ottawa. In fact, I do know I wouldn't. But Ottawa has shown they can hang. And it takes me to a couple of conversations I had over the last couple of weeks with Sens fans. In fact, just one a night or two ago on Twitter. We had a listener ask, do you think that either one of the Ontario teams have the same coach or GM to start next season? And we'll get to the Toronto thing. I don't want to make this about that. But if I was an Ottawa fan, despite my frustration, I don't think I'm replacing either one of Steve Staios or Travis Green at this point. And so much of it is tied to the fact that it has been goaltending and then it has been the penalty kill. And both of those, they've happened for a reason. They hang on management and they hang on the coaching staff. And yet, I can make the argument for Travis Green that, fuck, man, if I get a save through the first 40 games, the Sens are at minimum 6 points better, 8 points better. Like, how many games were pissed away on just a bad goal at a backbreaking moment? And if you're going to have Brady out and then Brady not right, even when he gets back, and I'm taking shit all over the place for the Brady conversations around here. I think the conversations are legit. If you don't, that's fine. I'm not here to make it about that. But clearly, at some point, whether you think it was 2 games or 5 games or 10 games, when he came back from injury, he hasn't been right. And once you acknowledge that, and you acknowledge that the Shabbat injury has been brutal, while he was out, and he's put a bit of a charge into them since he's been back. And obviously, any team missing their number one goaltender for whatever reason is going to struggle. And you start to add all that up. If I'm Travis Green, I'm going, what do you want me to do? You look around at all the underlying numbers, and every one of them says Ottawa should be better right now. But they can't stop the puck from just going in at the wrong time. Those injuries were devastating. And I'm including Linus Ullmark. Whether you want to call it something else, it doesn't matter. Those absences have been huge. And so I can't get to a point where I'm looking at all of the numbers that surround this team and go, the coach should be fired over this. Now, the counter argument, of course, is that penalty kill did operate terribly for months under his watch. And we did see here in the last week or so, 2 weeks, that they have shuffled the chairs around a little bit in terms of who's going to be in charge of what. And that's the right thing to do. And you can make the argument, and it's a totally reasonable one, that needed to happen way sooner. Way sooner. Now, is that a Travis Green decision? Or is this more of a hybrid organization where Steve Staios has say in that, like which members of the coaching staff are doing what? I hired this guy for this and that guy for that. I would imagine Steve Staios has some say, but I would imagine that is mostly a Travis Green call. So if you want to pin that on Travis Green, I think that's fine. But I think that this is a case of, you waited too long. You were too patient. You were too loyal. And maybe to a certain degree, you were waiting for a save. And all of these things are tied together. But everything else that the Sens are doing at 5-on-5 especially suggests to me that Travis Green is not somebody I would throw overboard in a sacrificial lamb kind of way. The Steve Staios conversation is interesting as well. And like I said, I'm hearing people out, and especially in that debate a couple of nights ago, I said, well, like my argument was Levi Merelainen saved their season last year in a very short sample size, but nobody saw that coming, how great he was, whether it was November or December last year, and kind of showed something. And I don't blame the Sens for being like, all right, we've been developing this guy in-house. We like the tandem we have. And we're not going to spend assets over the summer to fix something that isn't broken, to have him start behind Ullmark. It was a risk. It always is with a young guy to see whether he's ready or not. And those numbers that I'm citing from a year ago are in a very small sample size. So it's a risk. But I don't blame Staios for thinking, we might be okay here. Now, you can blame Steve Staios for waiting way too long to change his mind and to go to a James Reimer or whoever it might be. It turned out to be right. Like if your penalty kill sucks and your starting goalie isn't around, no matter what you think of Merelainen, that kid's going to be under siege. Now, he wasn't good enough. But I don't, like I said, at some point, those two things, the PK and the goaltending, intersect in a really important way. And it would have taken a little time to untangle which is which, right? Like, is the goaltending killing our penalty kill? Is the penalty kill, hanging our goaltending out to dry? And neither one of those was 100% to 0%. The penalty kill was really bad, and the goaltending wasn't good. But I got to figure out before I give up on Merelainen how much of this is on him. And if you believe that it took Staios way too long to decide we need somebody else to come in here, and it really wasn't until Linus Ullmark stepped away, I think that's a reasonable argument. I can't be pissed at you for that. Why would I be pissed at you for that? You think what you want to think. I can't really argue with you is perhaps a better way of framing it. It's a body of work thing. And I think we get tied up, and maybe we should. This organization has seen a lot of turnover. And we heard the players 2 years ago, whenever Andlauer stepped in, say the crazy changes, the noise, we need it to settle down. And when it settled down, they settled down. And they had the good year last year, and they got into the playoffs. I think most of us assumed they would at least be close to the playoffs this year, if not, be in there. And so it's super frustrating when your expectations are so far out ahead of the performance that you get. And yet, I do think injuries have been a big part of this. And I'll cede that Travis Green took too long to fix or change the penalty kill, and Steve Staios took too long to address the goaltending. But I think on body of work, the numbers say that this team should be far better than the position that they're in right now. So I'm not firing Travis Green. And the number of moves that Steve Staios has made that have been good as opposed to the ones that have been bad, it's not close for me. I think Staios has settled things down, has made some nice moves. I guess Nick Jensen would be the other one where, can you go find us some help here? And then you get into a whole conversation of, well, we're already so far out of it. Are we going to trade to bring somebody else in? I guess the counter to that is, I don't need you to bring somebody else in. I just need you to play Mott and Paulo over Jensen. So all of these things are more complicated than just it's one thing and that would fix everything. I just think on merit, on body of work, both guys deserve a run back. We're going to talk about the Leafs here in a few minutes, and the Leafs got themselves into trouble before they got all injured. And now the injuries won't let them dig out, but they were already in big-time trouble. I think you could make the argument that the injuries put Ottawa in trouble. And when that's the case, I think it's really hard to blame the coach or blame the GM. Now, this is a Canadian market. When expectations are high and they don't pan out, fans demand a sacrificial lamb. Someone's got to get thrown overboard. At the end of the year, can you fire an assistant coach, fire a Baumgartner, and expect people to be like, all right, well, we got our pound of flesh? I don't know. We'll have to see how Ottawa fans feel at the end of the year. And look, smart organizations don't react based on how the fan base feels. But I think the head coach and the GM, in this case, we'll see. And this is a big win. Two big wins. Like I said, Vegas and Colorado. I think Ottawa's season is largely done. But you get two wins like that. You get healthy. We're just a few games from the Olympic break. If Ottawa can take a couple here more before they take that break, go get everybody rested, go get everybody rejuvenated, go get everybody healthy. Maybe Timmy Stu and Brady Tkachuk come back from the Olympics feeling good, having had good performances there. Maybe they're not dead. I tend to think it's too much ground to make up and too many teams to pass, but maybe it's not. Maybe you get on a bit of a run here. But even if they can't get back into the playoffs, I think there's been more good here than bad over the last couple of years. And I don't blame fans for being frustrated, but I think the organization has to be smart and not let that frustration boil too far into their decision-making. Anyway, an eventful night out at Canadian Tire Center. Big win over the Colorado Avalanche. Meanwhile, down on Bank Street, the Ottawa Charge got a pretty dramatic win of their own. That was the game, honestly, I had more of my attention. I was back and forth, obviously, between the two all night there on Wednesday. But I think it looked like, it was kind of sloppy for Ottawa. They just not great puck control, great puck management. We saw a bunch of turnovers. Now we saw Katarova score for Ottawa off a brutal Seattle turnover, so that was fun. I will also pump the brakes on some of the criticisms I had on the roster selection for Team Canada. For me, like I said, based on her performance with the national team, I would have had Seattle's Danielle Serdachny on the roster. Hearing some of the stats that she's put up, even since the roster selection and her game tonight, which wasn't bad. I'm willing to I'm willing to back off and suggest that it's probably fine should not be on the roster. I'm not forgiving them for the other picks I didn't like, but I think it's probably legit that she's not going to the Olympics. But, this team has been making me crazy for weeks now because I feel like this constant downer, which I guess some of the people I know would suggest is true to form. But Ottawa's got a lot of wins lately. They've been pretty hot. They've got a home winning streak. But all those fucking wins keep coming in overtime. And in the NHL, you wouldn't care because in Gary's world, it's just points. When you do a more reasonable, frankly, a more damaging, or rewarding, depending on what end you're on, the 3-point system that the PWHL uses, Ottawa's record coming into this game was 3 regulation wins and 5 overtime wins. That's 5 points they've left on the table by winning in overtime instead of winning in regulation. And I see the broadcast and I see the people covering the league go, what a great story Ottawa is, man. There's so much fun in overtime. And that's fun in the NHL when a win is a win and 2 points is 2 points. A win in overtime is not fun if you had the game in control in regulation and can't close it out. And it feels like for 3 years now, we've been talking about how Ottawa can get into the third and be tight and be right there battling and either will lose it at the last minute or will blow a lead and end up in overtime. And now at best, you're getting 2 points instead of 3. Like it looks wonky to me when you have 3 regulation wins and 5 overtime wins. And that stops being a silly quirk when you realize that's 5 points in the standings that you've missed. And you're 1 point out of the playoffs at the time the game started. So, look, good on them for getting the win tonight. But that game went into the third period looking like every bit another overtime game. They had tied it at 1 in the second. They come back, give one up early in the third to get down 2-1. And I missed a few minutes there where they tied it up because I had been flipped back to the Sens. But you go back over, Rebecca Leslie and everybody's favorite Emily Clark score in the last 30 seconds to get 3-2, 4-2 and get out of here on a winning record because they're not playing at home again for, I think it's a month. Like the Olympic break for the women has now started. And so their next home game, I believe I saw was February 28th. I might be slightly off on that, but it's almost a month. So to get that, send everybody off happy, and to show, and I don't know if killer instinct is the right word, but and again, I don't know what the right word is because I was going to say some fight, and that's not fair. When you keep winning in overtime, you have shown some fight. You show some stick-to-itiveness. So whatever the word you would want to use, I guess just the ability to finish in regulation. Because when you're coming down into the last minute of play and you're tied at 2 again, I'm grinding my teeth going, can we just fucking get a regulation win here? And to be fair, it could have been a regulation loss. Like they fought back just to tie it at 2. So again, all of these things are relevant, but I felt relieved more than anything else when I saw Rebecca Leslie. And man, I don't know anybody saw this coming for her this season. Like she's been fantastic. And obviously everybody knows what Emily Clark is. When I saw those 2 pot goals late in the game, not just to grab a quick lead and then give Seattle the chance to pull the goalie and tie it up. No, we're going to get another one right after and put that game to bed. That was more of a relief for me than a celebration. Like, okay, you didn't just sit back and wait it out and make sure you get a point and get into overtime and then see what happens. It was important to you to finish this off and then to really, bury the knife when you had the chance to get the 2-goal lead. And to me, that puts them into a playoff spot, sends everybody off to the Olympics feeling good, makes me feel a little better about the team, about their ability to close out. That's important. And it's going to be down the stretch here. And there's so many players across the NHL where I'm like, I got to figure that team wishes their player wasn't going, that they were just going to go have a nice break right now. That's where I'm at with Gwyneth Phillips because, man, does she get worked hard for Ottawa. Like, for my money, she's no worse than a top 3 goalie in the league. Maybe top 2. And I don't believe she'll be the starter for the Americans when they get over there. But I wish she wasn't getting on a plane and going over and going through the practices and the jet lag and all of that. So I wish she was going to put her feet up somewhere and just have a break. Because Ottawa's going to need her to be fantastic down the stretch. And so many teams' goaltenders are about to go have a nice little vacation. I kind of wish ours was one of them. Joss Larocque would be another player for Ottawa that I mentioned some of my objections to the players they selected for the Olympic team. I really like Joss Larocque and everything she's done for so long for Team Canada. And I think she's played well for Ottawa for the most part. But at that age, I think they could have selected a better player for Team Canada. And at her age, I think she could use the break for us here in Ottawa. And I wish she wasn't. And that it's so funny. When you talk women's sports, you start talking about age, you start talking about fitness and things like that. And you feel a little guilty about it. But you have to do it. If you're willing to have that conversation about Erik Karlsson or Drew Doughty, then we can have it about Jocelyn Larocque. It's fair. Trust me. I was going to say that's the way she'd want. I'm not sure she'd want me sitting here saying she shouldn't be going to the Olympics. But if this is how I feel about her as an athlete, I think she's comfortable with that debate. All these women have said that from day one in this league. Can you stop talking about how great it is that we have a league now and have jobs now and start talking about us as athletes and what happened in the game last night? Well, here we are. Jocelyn Larocque is Drew Doughty. Or is Erik Karlsson. Some of these aging defenders whose club teams are going to need them down the stretch. And instead of getting some rest and getting some relaxation, getting healed up, are heading 6 or 7 time zones away. 6, I guess. To play some more hard hockey. It is what it is, right? Oliver Ekman-Larsson for the Leafs. The Leafs. Fucking Leafs. Look, I would say, for my money, Tuesday night was the nail in the coffin. And it sure felt like it for a lot of people. There are lots of reporters, or not reporters so much as media members, certainly online accounts and influencers and whatever else, who are fairly dramatic no matter what. And so there was certainly that, because it was a bad loss to a divisional rival that did put you way out of it. But I think a lot of the more reasonable takes were also that, look, you're 8 points out now at the time that they lost there on Tuesday night. Could be more by the time you're hearing this. I didn't hear near enough people talk about how 19 of their last 29 games are on the road, where it's not exactly like they've been world beaters. And we talked about that earlier in the season. That while they were busy pissing away games, they were pissing away home games and easy games. Like they had the lightest schedule and the most home-heavy schedule. And eventually the bill was going to come due on that. And you were going to need to make hay early in the season to be able to withstand some of the blows that you're going to take coming down the stretch because of it. And obviously they did not. And look, I get tired of doing this, but this is not a surprise. Now, I will say, they sort of almost reeled me back in when they went on their 8-0-2, 9-1-3, wherever you want to measure the start and finish of that hot stretch. But I've mentioned it so many times on the show that in that time, it was only it was only the 4th best record in the division. So they absolutely made up ground, and they absolutely dug themselves out of the huge hole that they had dug. But they didn't quite put themselves into the playoff mix at that point because everyone ahead of them also had gotten hot. And that's why the start that they got off to was so devastating. Because at some point, even your worst teams in the league are going to have big, like really nice runs. And even the best teams in the league are going to have a month or so where you're like, oof, Jesus. Now, maybe they're not going to go like 2-8-2 or something, but they're going to be under 500 and they're going to struggle. But when you have the start that the Leafs had, that 9-1-2 that every team gets at some point in the season, while putting you back to respectability, no longer puts you deep into the playoff mix. And when you cool off, which was always going to happen, because no team in the league, barring maybe Colorado, is 9-1-2 good. So 9-1-3, it doesn't matter. You were going to cool off a little bit, and if you cool off before you've actually cemented your way back in, you're going to have a problem. And not only have they cooled off, they have just gone right off a cliff and look exactly like they looked in the first month or so of the season, month and a half of the season, fucking 2 months of the season. You have a 5-game homestand and get 1 point. That's disgusting. That is fucking Horacek era Maple Leafs. That is Randy Carlyle era Maple Leafs. That is 1984-85. They have not had a 5-game homestand since 1984-85 where they didn't get a win. And that year, they selected Wendell Clark first overall. And the fact that they had the first overall pick at the end of that season tells you exactly how good that team was. And so they're in a bad spot. Not to make the playoffs. That ship has sailed. And I said before to my weekly co-host, who always likes to try and paint me as some sort of hysterical alarmist until it all ends up happening, then he's like, yeah, we both thought that. I know you're listening. This team wasn't good this year. And I wasn't willing, when this first started to come up around the first week or two of November, to say it was injuries. Now, the injuries were starting to creep in then, but the bad start was not due to injuries. Injuries came after, and injuries made it harder for them to dig out. But injuries were not the reason for the shit start. Now that you're losing all these games, and you have no Tanev, and you have no Nylander, injuries are certainly one of the reasons you can't dig out, but they are not the reason you're here. This is a poorly constructed team. This is a poorly coached team. There are numerous players on the team that aren't pulling their weight. And when you put all three of those together, you get here. You get 8 to 10 points out of the fucking playoffs at the end of January. So, like I said, that hot run they got on around the holiday season, in concert with the firing of Mark Savard, which was funny, probably not sustainable to think that just pitching one assistant coach overboard turned them into world beaters, but it was amusing to have that little storyline for a while. But it's over. That run that put them, I think at best, they were 1 point out, I think is as close as they got. Were they ever tied for a wild card? I don't think so. I think they got to 1 point out. And it's like they spent every dime they had. They are every bit of goodwill, every bit of good play, every bit of good coaching that this group was capable of got them that close. And then they just ran out of gas and ran out of fuel. And when I say they're in a bad spot, like I said, I don't mean whether or not they're going to make the playoffs. They're not going to make the playoffs. But the one thing that I had said at the beginning when I alluded to my co-host was that this window is closed. Like, it was believable even then that they could turn it around and get into the playoffs, but that they weren't going on a run. And it turns out it was significantly worse than that. Not only are they not getting into the playoffs and not going on a run, they're just not going to get close to the playoffs. And we know that at the end of January. And like I said, now part of that is injuries, but that's not why they're here. There's so much blame to go around. And Any of you who follow me on social media know I can't stand this coach. I don't think he's had a system at any point, at any stop along the way in his NHL career. I don't think he has any idea what he's doing. I said it on the last show, one of the last shows. I think he arrived in St. Louis at the same time as Jordan Binnington got called up, and that guy went on the run of a lifetime and carried his coach to a Stanley Cup. And he gets to walk around now for the rest of his career saying, I am a Stanley Cup winning coach. And good for you, man. But somebody in management, in good organizations would go, yeah, but you're not the reason for that championship. These guys have been outchanced, outscored, outshot every fucking night for a year and a half. And he has no accountability. The amount of times, like when Stolarz gets the start against Vegas, and they ask him, why did he go, that's not my call, which is an exact throwback to a couple of weeks ago when they had a bad loss. And he goes, I don't know, go ask them, pointing at the locker room. You're like, thanks, coach. Great leader. You're supposed to be the motivational guy. That's what we were sold on. He's not necessarily a great tactician. That's what the assistant coaches are going to be for. But he's a great motivator. He knows how to push buttons. He doesn't know who's going. Let's start with the goaltending. It's not his fault that he's been saddled with two goaltenders who can't stay healthy. But when Joseph Woll was not ready to start the season because he was on personal leave, he did the one thing every dipshit moron like myself on Twitter said, hey, this doesn't mean you can ride Stolarz into the ground. And what'd we do? We ran Stolarz into the fucking ground. You had James Reimer in training camp because for whatever reason you didn't trust Dennis Hildeby. Now, I don't know if that's just Berube or Treliving or the goaltending coaches or their own internal people. I guess you weren't prepared to go with Hildeby, even though you could make a reasonably good case that he has been their best goaltender so far this season. So fine, you go out and you get James Reimer, whose numbers were fine last year in the NHL. You don't want him starting for you, but as part of a tandem or as a backup, he would have been able to be fine and help you get through this thing until Joseph Woll gets back. No, we're not doing that either. Cut him loose. For some reason, we're going to sign fucking Caden Primo off goddamn waivers. We're going to sit him on the bench because he stinks. We're going to get blown out in the games he starts because he stinks. And then we're going to put him back on waivers with like an .830 save percentage. Good job, everybody. That was cool. Nicely done. So, of course, Stolarz gets hurt. Can't handle those minutes. We all knew that. And what do? We're going to immediately get Joseph Woll back and ride him into the ground. And you can see it. He's got moments where he's leaving games with soft injuries that look like they're going to be bad, but they're not too bad. They dodge a bullet. But he looks exhausted at times and he's getting pulled. So he's got no feel for the goaltending, including on this most recent homestand. Like I said, you could make a case that Hildeby has been your best goalie this year. He doesn't get a single start while you're shitting the bed on this 5-game homestand. Instead, you throw Stolarz to the Wolves against Vegas. So you got no feel for the goaltending. You got any feel for the defense? No. These pairs are terrible most nights. They make no sense. I understand why you ride Troy Stecher as hard as you did when you first got him, because for some reason, despite being a third-pair guy his entire career, he got a little jump when he got here. Or maybe your D was just that bad that he looked good in comparison. But he didn't know when that train ended. He wasn't able to identify that, hey, Stetcher's kind of turning back into what Stecher is, which you can still use. He's still fine. But stop playing him 22 minutes a night. It's over. So no, you got no feel for that. You got no feel for the forwards. I don't know what you're doing with Austin Matthews. To the Leafs' credit, and forget what they spent to get Scott Laughton, because it was too much. But Scott Laughton is a perfectly capable bottom six center who can handle tough matchups. You got Nick Waugh in the Marner deal, a perfectly capable bottom six center who can handle tough matchups. Won a Stanley Cup doing it. And you're still giving Austin Matthews all the tough defensive zone matchups. How is that guy ever going to score when he's buried in his defensive zone and having to defend every night? What's the point of having Lawton or having Waugh if Matthews is still going to have to handle all the tough matchups? And he's blocking shots out there off the inside of his feet and like the guy. Okay. So stupid to begin with, but let's go with it. Okay. Austin Matthews has to be your number one matchup guy, and he's going to take tough defensive zone starts, and he's going to face all the big matchups. I guess we should give him some really solid defensive wing help. Nope. Where the fuck is the defensive zone Max Domi and Bobby McMahon are out there? That's your matchup line now. So even if I'm willing to go with you on the idea that Austin Matthews has to be the defensive zone guy, you give him nothing, no help. Nobody who knows where the defensive zone is. Nobody who knows what to do when they end up in it. That line is getting outscored despite how good Matthews has been over the last month. He has found his touch. He is scoring again. And they're still getting buried because Max Domi doesn't know how to get a puck out. Meanwhile, Scott Lawton's playing 9 minutes in the last game. He's one of the only guys going. He's one of the only guys who's got any kind of emotion, and Berube can't see it. He can't find it. He clearly doesn't like Scott Lawton as a player. So as we get to this point here in a minute where we start to talk about who stays and who goes, and I'd be willing to say to both Bobby McMahon and Scott Lawton, hey, we're somewhat interested in keeping you around if the number is right, but you will not stay here after the trade deadline if you're not signed. We cannot risk you walking for nothing just to maybe help us get close enough to finish 3 points out of the playoffs. So you will be signed by the end of the Olympic break, or you will be traded by the deadline. That's it. That's the whole thing. That's the deal. Why would Scott Lawton ever agree to that if the coach here is going, 9 minutes for you? Fuck that. Is Scott Lawton a world beater? No. Is he perfectly capable being a middle six guy? Maybe some win. I don't hate him at fourth line center, but he's going to want to be paid higher than a fourth line center, and he's going to want more ice time than this coach is giving him. So if you're keeping this idiot coach around, then you got to let Scott Lawton leave because it's not going to make any sense to give him money to play 9 minutes a night on your fourth line. And the guy who put the team together, who's going to get to make these decisions. This is the biggest problem they have. Because he has two choices. Walk up to management and say, this is a lost year. We can't make the playoffs. And we need to sell. Not necessarily sell everything, but we need to sell some of our UFAs and some of our other pieces to see if we can get some picks, either to use for trades over the summer or to, heaven forbid, draft a prospect or two in June. And that is a perfectly reasonable approach. That is what the Leafs should do right now. But the first question from a capable ownership group would be, okay, I understand. Why are we here? Guy who built the team, how did we get here? And that's an uncomfortable question for the GM to have to answer. So the far easier thing for him to do is to point and go, you know what? We've had some injuries. The guys will get back. They're healthy. We really think we can make up 8 points in the standings while playing almost every night on the road for the rest of the year. And so we're going to buy. We're going to go out. We're going to keep McMahon and Lawton. We're going to trade whatever dust mites are still kicking around the cabinet where we used to keep draft picks and prospects and try and get more. Because that's how good this team is. I've built a good team. He can't go into ownership and say, I blew it. Please also give me the opportunity to fix it. That's the admirable thing to do. That's what's best for this franchise, but that is not what's best for this general manager. He deserves to be fired for the team that he's built. I believe he probably will be at the end of the season. But the damage he can do between now and then by trying to save his own job instead of trying to put this franchise back on a more stable footing could be astronomical here. And it's fucking terrifying. This isn't the guy. And yet, I've mentioned it before. The new president, the guy representing MLSE, likes this guy. Really likes Berube. Was having meals one-on-one with Berube. I don't know how Treliving would have felt about that, but last summer, Keith Pelly is meeting with Craig Berube, and I think this guy's going to be such a good asset to the organization, and we want him to be more involved than just a typical head coach. Like, oh my God. Oh God, no. But that's where they're at. You need Brad Treliving to be A, suddenly get good at his job, and B, be selfless and noble and not worry about whether or not what's best for the team is what's best for his continued employment. They are so screwed. I would probably, and here's the last thing on this. You have to sell. I don't know that they're going to sell. But they have to sell. And I'm seeing people online saying I would sell literally anything not nailed down. And I get that. I do. But there are some useful pieces here, and free agency is trash. So if you want to do the quick bounce back thing, you have to have some guys here still. Like, I don't know, is Tanev coming back? Are you trading Carlo at the deadline? I would. But if that's what you're doing, can you also trade Benoit and OEL and then trust that you're going to bring in 4 or 5 more capable defensemen over the summer so that you can contend for a playoff spot next year? It's a tough ask, man. If you're shipping out Waugh and Lawton, and Michelli and Bobby McMahon, I'd trade Max Domi. Again, who's going to play here next year? Not only are there not that many good free agents cost more. It's a bidding war. I guess if you get enough picks back, you could make some deals that way. But you need to use some of those picks to get some prospects back in here. So everybody talking about doing it the Washington Capitals way. Well, they sort of fell off for a year, but then they made some smart deals and, found some shrewd free agents similar to the Bruins way here over the last year, although I'm not certain how good that bounce back has been. And even the Washington one. How good was it really? Like, yeah, they hung around longer than we expected, but they're out of the playoffs again. And, it's not like it turned them back into world beaters. That's the model, though. But to do that, I'm not sure how many of these pieces you could... Like, OEL is the interesting one. That guy is playing as well as he's ever going to play in his career. Like, yeah, certainly he used to be better in his 20s. I'm talking about the rest of his career. He's getting old, but he is having a hell of a year. And I would be willing to trade him because I don't think he'll ever have more value than he has right now. But do you need him next year? So these are the types of really tough decisions you're going to have to make, because sell everything is fine if you're planning to enter a teardown and just this era is over. At that point, see if Matthews and Nylander have a list that they want to go to as well and really get this thing started if you're tearing it down. I don't think that's what they want to do, and I don't think that's what they have to do. They have decent enough goaltending. They still, as long as they have Matthews and Nylander and Nyes, are going to have some pretty good talent up front. I don't think you have to rip this thing completely apart, but it does mean you're going to have to walk a really fine line of don't just bring back the whole same team next year and go, well, hopefully we won't be injured this year and it'll be fine. No. You're going to have to trade some of these guys away, but you're going to have to keep enough of the ones and identify the right ones that you want here next year that can help you. And I just have no faith that Brad Treliving can do that. He's not the guy for this. He's the guy who helped get us here. And I'm not saying Sheldon Keefe and Kyle Dubas were perfect, but they never got us here. We talked about it at the time. Brad Treliving was the only guy available with any kind of experience when Shanahan and Dubas had their little pissing match. Shanahan won. Dubas was out. You need somebody immediately, and Brad Treliving was there. He was just there. And Shanny went, yeah, all right, I guess. Uninspired hire got us to a fairly uninspired place remarkably quickly. No doubt as we go on, there'll be more on this as we see which route they try to take. But I can't say I'm shocked we were here. As I said, that hot streak that got them close again made me go, all right, well, maybe I was a little harsh. They're still not going anywhere in the playoffs. But if they just play kind of above 500 hockey from here, then, you know, maybe they can get in one of the wild card spots and maybe win around, probably not, but it won't have looked like quite this much of a disaster. But Willie goes down long term. Tanev is out. You keep breaking your goalies. You don't know which one's the right one to play on any given night anyway. Fuck it. Back off a cliff you go, and it is. It's over now. It must have been love, but it's over now. All right, when I start doing that, it means it's time to go. I apologize once more for the fact we didn't get Mickey on here today. Sometimes things just out of our control. That's probably it until the Monday show, but we'll see if anything else comes up. As I said, I don't like to stack these solo shows up one on top of the other. I certainly understand the conversational shows are better, but you know, we obviously needed something here with the amount of things going on. And like I said, interesting times for the Sens, interesting times for the Charge, and disastrous times for the Leafs. It was worth coming in and having at least a quick chit chat, right? And they never turned out to be all that quick. So that's that for another episode of the podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Give us a follow on whatever social media app you prefer at Tall Can Audio, and on your favorite podcast app. My name is Matt Robinson. We'll catch you on the next one.
I thought it generally sucked. I didn't think it was a specific suck. I thought it was like an all-encompassing type of suck. So, you know, we're going to try and rectify that. But for right now, I'm going to be pretty pissed about it.